with both of the organizations, right, that I am leading, the work centers around equity, right? And equity meaning access, right? That to me is what equity has to mean. Because there's this idea that equity is something that is not owed, that it is usually viewed as a handout. It is usually viewed as something used to limit, to infantilize, and to actually like hold against, right? So the first thing I would say is that like we need to kind of come into this new mindset of equity meaning accessible.
Welcome, everyone, to our special series of the GCNC Worldview podcast. I'm your host today, Jill Reddish, and this is our special mini series, the People Power Leadership Series, in which I'm co hosting with the amazing Stephanie Powell, who is the CEO and founder of Emerald Lane Recruiting. Hey, Stephanie, thanks for being here.
Hey, Jill. Good morning.
Yeah. So together, we're diving into something that's not talked about too much in the cannabis space. We're looking at leadership. We're talking to executives who are shaping the industry and asking them about how they think about leadership, how they lead people and manage across different continents as everything changes and expands. And we're seeing how the people power is really what makes the difference between success and obsolescence. So today we have a fantastic guest, Frederika Easley, who is the executive director of the Cannabis Impact Fund and the president of the Minority Cannabis Business Association and the host of the amazing podcast, The People Are Blunt. Frederika, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to dive into this conversation. I know it's going to be so juicy. So let's just kind of start off with Frederika. Will you tell us a little bit about all of the work that you're doing? I know that's a huge question, but give folks a sense of how you spend your time and what your main goals in this work are.
Yeah. So, you know, with both of the organizations, right, that I'm leading, the work centers around equity, right? And equity meaning access, right? That to me is what equity has to mean. Because there's this idea that equity is something that is not owed, that it is usually viewed as a handout. It is usually viewed as something used to limit, to infantilize, and to actually like hold against, right? So the first thing I would say is that like we need to kind of come into this new mindset of equity meaning accessible, because if things are accessible, if the industry is accessible, if a process is accessible, then I don't really need, the extra assistance, if you will, right? I could literally pick myself up by my bootstraps, right? But like the first thing I need is actually to have a boot. So all of the work that I do is centered around people from marginalized communities, people that specifically in the cannabis industry or associated with cannabis prohibition have been disproportionately impacted, right? So those individuals and communities. And so the work centers around education, it centers around advocacy, it centers around training, it centers around awareness in terms of the success and sustainability of this industry, really truly depending on how diverse and how inclusive it is, right? We know that the cannabis industry has been built on the backs of people who look like me, right? People who may even from the Emerald Triangle, like look like you, but people from like the outskirts, right? Like those outliers. We know that cannabis prohibition centered around people, right? It wasn't even about this plant. It was like demonizing people. And people who were on the fringes, whether they were, free and loving, whether they were jazz musicians, whatever the case may be. And even globally, right? We're thinking of, tribes, we're thinking of cultures that have used this plant for thousands of years, right? That are a part of their daily practices, right? Their spiritual practices. But all of that was demonized. All of that has been demonized. The US has used their influence globally to push for that demonization of this, right? And so the work that I do is centered around, how are we educating around the hypocrisy? How are we moving past that? How are we normalizing this plant, right? Normalizing its acceptance? And how are we making sure that this industry does not fall into the scope of what we're already seeing from all big industries? When you think of alcohol, you think of tobacco, you think of oil, right? Like, how are we making sure that this industry does not follow suit?
That's a lot to tackle right there. And I love how the work that you're doing is just chipping away and creating pathways forward, chipping away at prohibition and moving us towards a diverse and equitable and very rich industry. Would you like to say anything more about any of those kind of like specific programs that the Cannabis Impact Fund and MCBA do?
Yeah. So CIF, Cannabis Impact Fund, we have resources that center around training. So we have our anti-racism training modules, and we have our RISA, which is a racial equity assessment, right, for businesses, that centers around how are businesses employing equitable practices, right? Like, how are you making sure that your decision-making table is diverse, right? Because if that's not enough in order for you to do like the right thing, right? There's ROI attached to that, right? Like, we have the data that shows that the more diverse your decision-making table is, the more profitable your business, right? Like, you're tapping into demographics, your message is more genuine, is more authentic. And so doing the right thing, right, is also a profitable thing. It's also a rewarding thing. And unfortunately, what we're seeing, like post George Floyd, like in 2020, everyone wanted to be quote unquote woke, right? Like, all of these businesses wanted to have DEI departments or positions. And we're seeing, with number 47, with this new regime, if you will, that there's been a huge shift. I mean, like, literally, like from election to inauguration to now, there's been a huge shift in this that to me it taps into the broader scope of just morale and humility, right? That I think that there have been some major changes too, and we saw it chipping away, but it's definitely heightened at this point. So that's the work that we do, right? In terms of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, I came into presidency towards the end of last year and immediately got working with the board on setting our priorities, right? Our 2025 priorities. And so we have a number of things that we're working on. The first of which is, we know that all roads lead to elections, and we have a midterm election coming up. For those of you who may or may not be paying attention to what's going on in Texas, there was a vote, to totally ban the hemp industry, right? Which is going to cost thousands of jobs, whereas they could have voted to regulate it, to figure out, the parameters of it and bring that revenue into the state, but they chose to ban and to attach it to pay raises for educators who we know are already spread really thin. Education is not something that you get into thinking that you're going to make the big bucks, right? So that is the move that was made, but I digress. We opened up our ally membership tier so it can include friends and family, and so what that is, we're building an army, right? The only way that we're going to be able to move this industry forward is if we fire these people who have these antiquated views on what the plant is, what it's about, and we bring people in who are more about common sense reform and more forward thinking, right? And more logical, I will say. And
Yeah, look
so,
at the science, look at the public health, all of that. Yeah.
I don't remember a time when 70% of US citizens or Americans, however you want to, label that, but all agreed on something, right?
Right.
And we have polling that shows that 70% agree that we need to be moving forward with the plan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have data that shows that people are transitioning from alcohol consumption into cannabis consumption or looking for something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is no longer what they want to do. I mean, as a geriatric millennial, right? So 84 baby,
I prefer the term elder millennial.
Okay, well, we could do that.
Shout
Elder
out to
millennial.
Ilse Schlesinger, the comedian.
There's two 84s on this call, so you also got to be careful here, Jill.
I'm 86. Like,
But as the elders, right? As the elder millennials, like the people who remember payphones, the people who remember not having call waiting, those kind of things.
mhm.
You know, having hangovers, you know, is it's not a sexy look. It's not a good thing,
Mm-mm.
especially if you're a parent. Like your kids do not care about your hangover. It is 7 a.m. and they are like, where is Bluey? And I
Where's
want,
breakfast? Yeah,
correct, I want
that
pancakes,
slows you down. I know.
right? But so we see the trends, right? So we opened up our ally membership tier for friends and family. So if you are a consumer of cannabis, you need to know that this is your fight, that even though some of our politicians and people in the industry loosely use legal, cannabis is not legal. It is regulated, it is decriminalized, it is not legal in the States, right? And so if you are a consumer and you care about being able to have to have products that are tested and be able to visit a dispensary and be above ground, if you will, then this is your fight. And if you're a person who believes that people 21 and older should have the right to choose, then this is your fight, because we know that the ability to choose and the rights of our humanity are being attacked, right? So we did that. Then we have our equity workshop tour, which is a national tour that goes, coast to coast, states in between, that is really centered around bringing in all the stakeholders, right? It's making sure that the consumer, the business owner, the regulator, the politician, that all of these individuals have an opportunity to learn from each other, to network with each other, to make connections and deals with each other. And then we have the revamping of our equity report. So in 2022, MCBA released an equity report that was highly regarded. It is one that the integrity of it centers solely on, here's an analysis of where equity is in the industry. And so we're revamping that this year, right? But we're adding a little twist to it. So we're going to keep the integrity of the report. We're going to add some new buckets. We're going to update some things. But we're also adding a public facing component to it, because we know that there's a difference between theory and practice. And so oftentimes, here's the language, and not speaking to intention, but here's the language. And then this is how people are actually able to engage with that language. And so we wanted to be able to paint that picture of, words into practice.
That's incredible. And I think, as you said, that double alignment of like, where are the words and where are the actions and how does that come together? And I think talking about the larger and broader theme of leadership, it's those leaders that not only can have the theory, can have the data, but then also can implement and gather others to come together. And on a bit of a different, past story, we're going back a little bit. Before you got into cannabis, you also were working to represent people in sort of large leadership, organized labor, and healthcare as well. And really seeing how you were mobilizing the individual to lead as a larger group. And I think that's an interesting component, because that's also resonates with what you just said. So what do you think that like the cannabis industry can learn from more of these organized labors, or from those years there? What have you brought into that you already practice now? And what would you kind of wish that they would have and look at within the cannabis space for employees and across the organizations?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first thing is I'm at a point in life as an elder, right, where I no longer siphon myself, right? I think that this is something that, I've definitely learned from Gen Z, is like I bring my full self to any project, anything that I'm working on. So absolutely, I spent 15 years in organized labor. Absolutely, those lessons learned are coming with me here. And the interesting thing is that, cannabis initially, cannabis was breaking the mold, right? And so you had a lot, or I won't say a lot, you had a higher percentage of women who were in C-suite positions, who were in ownership positions, who were in leadership positions. And since that time, though, cannabis is looking more like a microcosm of just like kind of our regular capitalist patriarchal society, where you're in the room and you are one of few, right? And we know that there's intersectionality, and we know the levels and the layers that can come with that, right? Being the only woman in the room, being the woman of color in the room, things of that nature. So I would say, you know, some of the things that I bring with me specifically on managing is strategy and more of a team building kind of mindset, right? Whereas that I don't need, and I am not the expert on all things, right? When I'm building a board, I'm building a coalition. I am comfortable in what I'm bringing. I'm comfortable in knowing what I know and acknowledging what I don't know. And so that also helps with delegating, because I'm looking to you. Like, this is the reason why I want you here, is so that your expertise can shine through, right? So I think that that's one of the things that we definitely need to look at, and really kind of take coalition serious, and kind of put some of the egos aside. The success and sustainability of this industry depends on that, because if we don't get our shit together, right? If we don't figure out this unified front, then there won't really be a regulated space to talk about. I think the other thing that I learned in labor that I bring into this industry is people power, right? And that is why we're looking at all roads leading to midterm elections, because, you know, we will never really have the money, right? Like, I heard a breakdown of like how many years or lifetimes it would take to amass the wealth of like Musk or whatever the case may be. And it's like, so we don't have that, right? Like, we're not going to have that. But, you know, people can move things, and there's a difference between like one finger poking versus when you ball up your fingers and you make a fist, right? That's the organized fist. And so you can do a lot if you punch something versus if you're just poking at it. So I think I definitely bring that mindset in. It's like, how are we really working to work smarter, not harder, and working together, like with our resources and things of that nature, so that we can actually make an impact. And then I guess the last thing I'll bring into it is, I am a leader that does not believe in asking people to do anything that I'm not willing to do. And so over the 15 years of being in labor, I started as an organizer. My first organizing project was in New Orleans, Louisiana, after Hurricane Katrina. That was in education. So that was when I was working in K-12 and PSRP. But like, so through those years, and because of where I started, I understood what I was asking of other organizers, of other people. And it was never something that I was asking that I was not willing to do, because I had done the 16-hour day. I had done the door knocks, the house calls. I had done the canvassing. Like, I had done all of those things, and was still willing to do it. And I think that is something that leaders, that actually makes you a stronger leader, is like to not lose that connection with the people who you are supposed to be representing, or you're supposed to be supporting, right? Like, you need to be connected at all times, and sometimes you need that reminder of what's at stake for them and how something may feel. So I would say that all of those things are important. And then the last thing I'll say is, like, because I'm actually in some conversations, or starting some conversations with UFCW, because it's important to me. Like, look, when people think about labor, and this is in general, not just in cannabis, but when people think about labor, they view it as people are organizing because there's a problem, right? We're seeing it with Waffle House right now, where, you know, they're organizing, they're out on strike. We, you know, with Amazon, you know, with warehouse workers, you know, out on strike. But there's another way of doing it, right? It doesn't have to be because there's a problem, right? You can organize. There could be union security, if you will, even when things are great. And the reason why that's important is because when things are great, what you want to do is memorialize that. You want to capture that, because organizations and businesses are run by people. And those people will change. Like, who's in leadership will change. And so what you don't want is the morale to suffer, where people love how things are today, but then once a leader changes, now everything is totally different. So we can also look at this as an opportunity to capture best practices, to memorialize, to kind of put the stake down in terms of what's working and being able to hold on to that. And then what that does, because I'll attach it to ROI for you, because I know people care about that because we're in a capitalist society. So what happens, right, when you do that is that you're changing your retention. You know what I mean? Like when a company looks at how much money is wasted over recruiting and training and and all of those things that go into onboarding talent, why waste that? Why not try and figure out how you can make people happy, how you can keep the talent, how you can keep people with you, and that they see themselves as a part of what you're doing, that it's not just a job, but they actually have some ownership and they actually feel connected, right? So that was probably a very long answer, but I wanted to state all of those things.
Yeah, I'm resonating so hard with this last point that you brought up of recognizing when things are going well and looking and observing at what are these things that are part of the culture that is creating a good and positive culture. And definitely a huge sign of that is when there's a problem, if something in the metaphorical supply chain for the widgets is going wrong, people need to be able to raise their hand and say, there's a problem here, this could lead to something bigger and worse, right? And I personally have experienced a few work cultures that do work well, in which there is safety for raising your hand about an issue, and where people feel rewarded and invested in all of that. And I feel like the coworkers who I worked with alongside that, like that's a seed that's planted in all of us. And now as we have gone our separate ways, we don't want to settle for something that doesn't meet that, right? And that creates a fire with us of like, no, let's be that change. Let's make things better. Yeah.
Yeah, I consider it, I guess one of the other, management kind of tools is managing up, right? And it's something that I don't think gets talked about enough. I think it's something that there's some fear attached to it, right? Because there are these ideas that if you are a manager, you're supposed to know everything, you're supposed to have control over it. I think specifically when we look at intersectionality, there were all these antiquated ideas in terms of like, there's only space for one, right? Like there's only space for one of me at this table. And so I don't want to feel threatened by someone else kind of like coming up, right? I don't want to feel threatened by someone else shining, when in actuality, like the good show of a manager or a leader is the people under you. I don't want to say under you, but the people who are on your team shining, right? Like what good is a team if there's only one star, right? Like your team should have many stars. And so the idea of managing up is, empowering your team to help you help them, essentially, right? So this is something that I even do. I do with CIF. I do with MCBA. I'm like, hey, I may be asking you to do things. I don't remember all the things that I'm asking you to do. So like, please tell me like, hey, Rika, I have 10 things on my to-do list right now. Would you like to prioritize them? Like, would you like to order the priority? Like, are there things, like I'm telling you, I got 10 things, but I can only get like 5 of them done this week. You know what I mean? And so would you like to prioritize what those 5 things are? I don't feel slighted in any way by that. Thank you so much. You know what I mean? For bringing that to my attention and allowing me to weigh in, right? Because I want you to show up in your best way. I don't want you overwhelmed. I don't want you burnt out. And so, yeah, oftentimes like when we're moving quickly, you're not keeping that, you're not keeping track of that, and you may not be aware. So I think managing up is one of those other like kind of concepts that is not employed as much as it should be.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to your point before of like bringing the whole self in leadership. I think Myself, with 9 years in the industry and 6 recruiting, you know, I get to have very deep one-to-one conversations with a lot of executives, but then the look when everyone's on the floor at the conference or on a webinar is everything's fine, everything's good, everything's great. And there's a lot of people who aren't showing their whole self, and there's a lot of loneliness, and there's a lot of darkness, and there's a lot of heaviness, there's a lot of uncertainty in this industry. And so I think that reminder to bring your whole self, and then also the idea that you're working with some of these new generation of leaders coming into the industry with various new licensing, et cetera, in these new states, and reminding them they have a peer group, reminding them they have a mentor, reminding them they get to be their whole self, and then their team members get to sign back their whole self too. And so I think it comes back to that humanity component of like just being people. Like we're allowed, you know, we start talking about people becoming robots. You know, we're allowed to be people. We still get to be. We get to touch the, you know, breathe the air and like touch the skin. And so it's like, let's bring that to leadership as well. And that's where I think our industry, we see a lot of successes in the groups around us.
Yes, 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 absolutely. Like, you know, now
I know. I feel like
that.
I feel like the me of 15 years ago, you know, in my 20s would have just loved this conversation and felt so reassured and so
Me too.
inspired. Right? Yeah. There was not a lot of this 15 years ago. It was all lean in and just work harder and good luck getting a nanny.
Listen, and like, oh my gosh, just the mind. Oh God, I was going straight New York. I was about to cuss, but listen, you know, this idea, like this American dream, like this idea of the American dream, right? Where it's like you work for a company, you work 30 years, you're going to retire, you're going to have your pension or whatever the case may be. You know, go to school, right? You need a college degree so that you can do these things. And meanwhile, you have people out here with 6 figures in student loan debt, right? They're now talking about garnishing wages. You know, they've disbanded the Department of Education. You know what I mean? Most people I know who have a degree aren't even working in the field of their degree. You know what I mean? And so just this idea of working, you'll retire and then you can start living. It's like, no, like I'm not like, we can no longer subscribe to that, because what has happened to a lot of our elders is that they get to the retirement age and their health, you know, because we know cortisol is a silent killer. And so their health is so just ruined that they can't even enjoy being retired, right? And so one of the things, like prior to COVID, I used to take like at least 2 international trips a year. And, you know, that really shifted some things for me. Just seeing the pace of life, the things that other cultures prioritize, this whole Western idea of individualism, and like, oh, you know, I work 18 hours or you only work 16. Oh, I have 5 weeks of vacation, but I don't take all my weeks of vacation. I'm like, WTF? Like, that's a part of the package. Like, why would you feel bad about, like, why would you give me something that you really don't want me to use, or you're going to like use against me in terms of my promotion or my position in a company or in an organization? It is just crazy. And so I remember one trip we took to Lisbon, and we were staying actually in a neighborhood, because I prefer like the B&B kind of style versus like hotels and things. And we needed to go to the bank. And the banks did not open until 10 a.m.
Oh yeah.
And we're waking up and we're smelling, you know, pastries being prepared, you know,
Fresh
and
bread.
yes, and it was just like, this is not how to live. Like, this is like, they got it right. Oh my God. You go to work at 10 o'clock, you get an hour and a half, 2-hour lunch break. You're off at 8. You go have dinner with family. You have a 3-hour dinner, like family style. You know, you're having your wine or whatever the case may be. You know, you may go out for an extra something afterwards. You make it home by midnight at the latest. You can still get 8 hours of sleep, even getting home at midnight, because your day doesn't have to start until 10 a.m. You know? And so
I'm all about that.
listen, it was like, that is how my internal clock, that's my circadian rhythm. You know what I mean? And so, but it was being exposed to these different ways of living. Like when people talking about going on holiday, they really are going on holiday. Like, it is like whole towns and cities that are like shut down pretty much. It's like, we're not here. We're not here.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
there's a rhythm to life, and it's not expecting the same thing every single day. Because, like you said, Stephanie, we're not robots. We're people, and we need to be living our lives. Yeah, I love these things that you're pointing out because the rhythms are so important, and that's yet another part of leadership strategy. You know, when you can check in with your own circadian rhythms and set expectations for how quickly am I going to get a reply, or how quickly should someone get a reply from me, right? And when do I start my day? Am I trying to respond to every single email that I get while I'm on a plane crossing the Atlantic Ocean? No, thank you. That can wait, you know? Yeah.
and it is a constant, I'll tell you, it's a constant thing because, you know, the way that I was trained up in labor, it was very intense, you know, very intense, campaign work, very intense. And so I have to remind myself on a daily basis that, self-care also has to be on my calendar, that I am actively working on weaponizing my calendar, right? On, how do I allow things to, how am I booking things? Am I packing my day with 7 back-to-back calls? Am I giving myself a day a week where I can really take some time to not rush through, but read through the things I need? I can respond more thoughtfully. Those are all, I mean, it's a real thing because it is more difficult to unlearn than to learn. But it is something I think that we owe ourselves. I think it's something like now being a mom that there are things that I know I can do for my kids that I wasn't able to do for myself in terms of boundaries and things of that nature. And so we owe it to the next generation of like, there's a balance between like, okay, are y'all lazy and are y'all entitled versus also like, maybe we got this kind of messed up, like we got to find a middle, right? Like maybe y'all might be a little bit over here sometimes, but we see what our over here has gotten us. So, maybe the work is figuring out this middle point of, I won't say work-life balance, but I'll say, a, a situation that is more suitable, right, to a marathon kind of reality. And cannabis is definitely a marathon. People, I think, got into it and they were sprinting. And the industry will make you think that you need to sprint, and that you need to react. But it is really a marathon. And the only way that we're going to be able to get through this and work through this is if we view it as such.
Such a great point. That's such a great point. Stephanie, do you have any other questions?
I mean, this has been such a great conversation. I really love this idea of, again, remembering the human side of all of this and really bringing that in. Doesn't matter how many theories we have, or how many books you read, or how many YouTubes you watch. It's still really coming down to that individual self and saying, how do I want to show up as a leader? How do I show up as my best self? And how do I play the marathon? I really love that you highlighted that as well. So this has been, I have so many takeaways. I feel inspired to like go look at my calendar now. But we've been asking everybody who comes on this podcast the same kind of question to wrap things up. So if you could have one, work with us and sort of highlight one big win recently so we can all celebrate you. And then also, what is one of your wishes for the cannabis industry for the rest of 2025?
Okay. And I'll be quick because like, look, y'all know, if you didn't know, now you know that I can talk. So recent win. First thing also I learned from labor, right, is to make sure we are celebrating all of our wins, no matter big or small, because we don't always do that. So like, kind of debriefing and making sure you're giving people their flowers on work that's done, yourself included. One of the things that we wanted to do is at MCBA is we wanted to create a resource list, right? What we realize is that essentially we're all we have, right? Like we got to work together. And I thought about Black Wall Street, Oklahoma, and how many times the dollar would circulate within that community prior to it going out. And so we wanted to kind of create that same thing with MCBA, adding value to our members where we would negotiate different partnerships with businesses and in organizations, whether it was, discounts off of something or, trial runs or whatever the case may be, but just to help them along the way. And so excited that we are launching that. We got a couple of, and so people stay tuned because we're announcing partnerships kind of left and right. This is a value for our members. So we just got into an agreement with Simplifia, who's in the compliance space, where they were giving a 67% discount of their compliance software to MCBA members. BakeBot AI, which is this AI. I mean, like, look, AI is here, people. So like, you gotta get with it, right? But BakeBot, this is another minority-owned business that their tool centers around like the consumer experience, you know, online, and like how you are able to improve those baskets, how you're able to tailor offerings and things of that nature to your consumers and increase your profitability. So we're excited about that partnership. Human Resources Unleashed. You know, again, HR is a huge thing. We were talking about retention earlier. So there are some packages, because sometimes it's like you don't know what you don't know, you know, coming into any space. And so we were, you know, talking with Dakiana about are there packages for people who are like, you know, just coming into the space? Like, what are the absolute things that you would need? And then as you progress in your business. So I'm probably missing some. These will be, you know, they're going to be announced, and so please stay tuned. But those are some of the ones that were on the top of my head. So really excited about that win. And then my wish for cannabis. My wish for cannabis is for common sense. Is for the plant to be freed, you know? Is for, let's not have your personal preference impact or impose upon someone else's right.
Right. Like that's such an important litmus test to be asking yourself that I don't think enough people are asking is, you know, is this belief, is my belief in this policy, you know, infringing on someone else's human rights and or oppressing them?
Yes.
Generally, those are pretty clear-cut situations. And when we open things up to be more free, generally that leads to really good results, you know? We still have to live in society and in community with each other, so it's not a free for all. But yeah, I hear you, Frederika. That's beautiful. And what a deep note and reminder for us to end on. So thank you for bringing it back to the reason why we're all here, to free this plant and be able to share the benefits of it with so many others. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, it's deep. So thank you so much. With that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up our conversation. Stephanie, thanks for co-hosting and for bringing us together on this incredible People Power podcast. It's so amazing. And I think we walk away inspired with every single conversation. Am I right?
And this one especially. So thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful conversation.
Yeah. Frederika, thank you so much for all of this. We will post in our show notes some links to MCBA so folks can find those resources, and links to the Cannabis Impact Fund so they can also access the resources there. And where else can people reach you? Anything you want to share out, like LinkedIn or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn by name. On IG, I am Classic, so KLASSIK 84. Here comes that 84 again. But yes, you know, most places you can find me by name.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much for this conversation. And I hope you all who are listening enjoyed it. Let us know, drop us a note with what resonated with you. And with that, everybody have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, ladies.